The Planning Commission podcast is a spirited discussion with myself and a couple of my longtime colleagues in the profession. Our discussions are based solely on our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions or views of our employers, the American Planning Association, or even our alma maters. So grab a seat in the back of City Hall, dig out an old copy of Robert's Rules, and for goodness sakes, read your packet. The Planning Commission is now in session.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. This session has begun, and we are going to have a heck of a conversation today. A little anarchy never hurt anyone. I think, maybe I'm wrong. History might prove me otherwise, but
we'll
nevertheless,
keep that profession specific, and we'll probably be on the right track with that.
Anarchy can be good. We are living in interesting times, as we know, and so it's all over the place. It might as well be in planning too, right? All right. Well, so those of you watching, those of you listening, you'll soon realize that one of our commissioners is not with us today. She will be back before you know it. But Jess, we wish you well and hope that everything can get back to normal and you can be back with us in short order. But we do have a quorum, and we're going to push ahead and talk about planning and anarchy. All right. So, Mr. K-Man, anarchy, ideas, thoughts. How can and why should our profession be sort of subjected to some sort of ideas that really change things quite a bit, and sort of an anarchist sort of an approach? I want to get to your thoughts on that in just a minute, on maybe an idea that you might have on what type of a thing we all could use. I'm going to hit this one first, though, and I don't know if how much anarchy this is, but it's something that I do think is really important. I really, really believe that a good planner, as much as possible, ought to have experience in the private and public sectors. I think that it's important. I mean, I know I've seen it in my career that both sides, whatever side of the fence you happen to be employed on in that moment, if you know what the other is experiencing and have been in those shoes, I think your perspective will be even more valuable. As a person who was at the public sector, I had no idea, because I hadn't been in consulting yet, of what does that mean from their vantage point? Whether it's the RFP process, the whole idea of scope creep. I had never even heard of what that was about, and bids and deliverables and all of these types of things. Even that concept of it, the extension of your staff and everything that kind of comes with the private sector, how to make things go faster, what the public is thinking, and how does the private sector get to that versus what the public does. But on the other hand, the public sector is a completely different animal, and you have to understand policy. You have to understand politics. You have to understand, unfortunately, the glacial pace. How do you say it? The
speed
glacial
of plate tectonics. Yeah.
Yes, the speed of plate tectonics. Yes, Pangea, right? That's sometimes how long a Pangea. That's right. But absolutely, right? To me, I think it's incredibly valuable that we experience both worlds. And if you do get the third leg of the stool of nonprofit work, because there are advocates and nonprofits out there that are also involved in planning in some capacity or another, and that's a completely different beast, right? Making sure that you have enough funds to keep the lights on, and who do you meet with behind what door to try to get the cogs of planning to move, and so on. So I don't know, that's probably one of mine. I know we're going to get into this conversation quite a bit with our guest momentarily, but do you have any crazy anarchy type planning ideas that you think our industry should experience?
Well, one, I'll agree with your public-private sector, and just from the standpoint of what I've experienced of people that come out of planning school and maybe work for a consultant first, and they don't know what to do when that planning and zoning commission or that city council meeting goes to hell in a handbasket on your particular topic issue that has nothing to do with your work, the quality of what you're presenting, that there are 35 other factors that you can't possibly consider. And if you've sat there till midnight as a public sector employee and watched that unfold, probably on a basis a lot more frequently than it should, you kind of know that. But I can see people they can get crushed by that the first time out there. So that's where I would tend to agree with that. I think overall, I think we deal with it. I hear it from you all the time, sitting on P and Z, of we're still stuck in this institutional framework that in some cases is 100 years old, and we've never considered that it could be anything different, or we've not advanced it. Or like you bring up, can we anarchy, can we not have a comp plan that has 500 conflicting goals in it? So when we do have to make a tough decision, and it's not inside the confines of the zoning ordinance, and we do have to go to the comp plan to try to figure it out, Section 2.3 doesn't contradict Section 4.9 in trying to figure those things out. I had a graduate student in an adjunct class I taught, and it took me a while to realize what she had unearthed in this comparative research paper. She had looked at a historical preservation plan for downtown Charleston, South Carolina, and compared it in a paper to the historical preservation plan for downtown San Diego. And she literally pointed out the San Diego one had 20 recommendations for implementation. The Charleston one had 500. So how in the hell can anybody make sense and prioritize 500? And all you've done in adopting a plan with 500 recommendations is made it to something you can never adopt. And you've only given fodder to the public to say, well, you haven't done anything for recommendation number 375. When are you going to do that?
Yeah, right. Like, you haven't taken actions to solidify the economic health of our community. What do you mean? We totally approved 4 check cashing places just in the last 2 months, right? Like, if planning is everything, then planning is nothing.
Or your favorite one of opposing a new hamburger joint that was justified because our goal is horizontal mixed use. And it's like, if ever there's a fabricated planning term, horizontal mixed use. Well, this place does offer burgers and fries, but this one offers burgers and tots. Therefore, we're not dealing with the same use at all on this corridor, and it achieves the goals of our comprehensive plan.
Well, that's because horizontal mixed use was one of the key terms that came out of the 1998 APA conference, right? Like, it was one of the key things hit, and everybody took it home and was like, oh, you're not going to believe what we learned. Well, anyway, we could have this conversation all the time and about all kinds of different crazy stuff. And I agree, man. It's like, we have to continue to evolve and matter, and right, and be relevant in so many different ways. Because if we don't, we're just kind of stuck in a different way of thinking from a past time. Then we as an industry aren't going to be as effective as we want it to be. And I think that's what this is all about, right? That's what this podcast is about. It is certainly what our guest is about, and what he's trying to do in terms of, giving all kinds of food for thought to people and stimulate, discussion. And that's what we're shooting for. And I think we just need more of it, and it's
something we talk about a lot on here. I mean, to me, every institution, especially a public one, needs to, check itself before it wrecks itself every so often anyway. And we just don't even want to go into those waters when we were talking about just the historical antecedents of zoning and how that needs to change. Here's an institution that's 100 years old, and what is it getting us? As our, as Dick Jackson said, as our guest, we've engineered physical activity out of people's lives, and our zoning codes are part and parcel of that. So why would we not be rechecking them? And I'm having a really, really hard time not bringing up some of the anarchist topics of our guest today, because I totally agree with them and have thought of them maybe not in those terms over time. So I can't wait to get to that discussion.
Well, then let's get to it. And first, we got to do our whiskey pairing, because on this topic, anarchy and planning, I think we could all use a shot of something good, and I hope you have something in store. So what do you got for us? Well,
I haven't had the bottle on hand recently. So this one I do, a Delilah's blended Scotch whiskey from Compass Box, which the history of this, I think, is what ties to this.
Yeah.
This is a homage to Delilah's which was the legendary Chicago punk rock whiskey bar. So if we can talk about anarchy, let's definitely talk about punk rock. And if we're going to talk about planning anarchy, let's talk about Chicago and the breadbasket of planning with everything that Daniel Burnham did. So the Compass Box does a great job of blending many different high-end Scotch whiskeys. If you can find anything that they do, you will not be disappointed.
You just gave me a great idea. Every planning and zoning commission meeting that I attend for our city here henceforth, I want to have walk-up music like they have in baseball.
Ooh, I
and
like that.
I want to have them, I'm going to insist that they play that. What is the old 80s song? I am the Antichrist, right?
Yes.
Let's do it. I'm going to see. That's probably not going to
walk up music for planning and zoning commissioners. It's like the Michael
Yes.
and now
I like
Commissioner
it.
Danley coming up.
Yes. What a jerk that guy is. Get him off. Boo.
I think like
All right.
Pantera's Walk would be the one for me.
Well, that's
would
a
be
whole
good
other
one to come
subject.
marching
I think we're beginning to see the framework of another episode
Yeah,
moving
I think
forward. So, but for today, let's get after it with our guest. All right, everybody, we want to introduce you to Mr. Rick Brown. He is a lifelong planner and lots of experience that he's going to pull from. So much experience, and he's such an inquisitive person that he has a phenomenal blog, Pan Ethos. And recently, I kind of was brought to my attention an article that he wrote about planning needs some anarchy, and that's what we're going to talk about. But first and foremost, Rick, thank you for joining the Planning Commission podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it and enjoyed the discussion so far. I did the mistake of going private sector first and then public.
Yes.
So
you were the blood-sucking vampire bat first, and then you went and did the noble thing.
I guess I was an anarchist in that way, and I went opposite.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, Rick, before we get into the article that you wrote and our top 5, we're going to do this Family Feud style.
Okay.
But first and foremost, tell us who you are. Tell us about your background and everything about that, and then also your blog and why you decided to do this, especially as you're supposed to be retired, Rick. Did not anybody tell you that? So go for it.
Well, I got to keep the wheels turning a little bit.
Hey,
right. Well, I was in planning for 30 years, got my master's in urban and regional planning from Virginia Tech after working in sales and marketing for a few years and finding that wasn't my gig. But I actually had been kind of a planner since I was a kid. I used to build cities out of blocks, Hot Wheels tracks, and model railroad kits and stuff like that in the basement of the house. And I'd have the whole, like 1/3 of the basement covered with sprawl, basically, of blocks. And use my Hot Wheels tracks as freeways and things like that. And
it's
then
those parking decks, those parking garages we used to play with as kids with the Hot Wheels. They always seemed so majestic, didn't they?
Yes, you do the little wind thing that winds the car up and down. Yeah, and then later I would do bird's eye views of cities, and I had enough pieces of 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper taped together that covered the entire ping pong table in the basement, and of a bird's eye view of a city I created, and then later would do skylines and stuff like that. But in 30 years in planning, primarily in environmental and land use planning. I did a lot of wetland regulations and floodplain regulations in a community. I've also done land use, obviously master plan work, park plan, zoning amendments, you name it, across the board. You get into all of those areas, but the primary focus for a long time was environmental planning. I've also served on a planning commission, and that would probably be another option if you want to do private and public sector, also be behind the desk and see it from that standpoint as well. And then it's a lot different there, when you have some very upset people.
Did you ever make anybody cry? Because that's always a
no,
badge of
thankfully
honor.
not
Oh,
that.
God, that's so hard, man. When they come in and start crying, like, oh
yeah. Thankfully not that. 3 or so
Well,
years
the
I was
food
on.
selection that you get on those boards always stands out. There's another episode to
right.
have. How many giant Subway sandwiches can I get?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. So been on that end of the spectrum as well. I retired just over 3 years ago now, and have noticed, and I mentioned this to Chris over the phone, that I was noticing that from the citizens' perspective, I guess, for lack of a better word, that a lot of stuff coming from planning and zoning seems to be the same. It seems to be kind of in a formulatic, if that's a word, and don't ring the gong, please, methodology. And it was troubling me. There's a lot of haves out there who know how to operate within the systems, shall we say. People that are developers, people that are in the real estate industry, people that are in government. They kind of know the processes and how to give input in various situations, whether it be a master plan or a specific plan. But the have-nots, it's a different story. And I'm talking have-nots can be anywhere from somebody that's homeless, to young people, to senior citizens, which I'm rapidly becoming, to even newcomers. And I'll give you for instance. My wife and I moved to Traverse City, Michigan, a little over 7 years ago. And shortly after we moved there, there was a charrette on a road project. They were trying to do a plan for this primary east-west corridor in the city. So we went to the charrette. It was going to be over 3 nights, I think, in a given week. And we were sitting there. And one of the first things that they said was get to know everybody else at your table, because they had 20 or 30 tables with 7 or 8 people at it. And we all were talking about ourselves. And my wife and I said, yeah, we just moved to Traverse City in the last couple of months. And somebody else also at the table was relatively new to the area. And one of the people sitting there was a long-term resident who said, well, if you haven't lived here at least 10 years, your opinion shouldn't matter.
Oh, geez.
And basically, I knew that wasn't true being a planner, but your average Joe or Josephine that attends, that maybe this is the first meeting they've ever gone to, or they're a little hesitant or nervous about talking in front of other people, that could be very dissuading, or there's probably a better word than that, or scary. Not necessarily that like it's a threat or something, but it is intimidating for sure. And so when I think of the have-nots, I don't only think of people that are necessarily poor or destitute or whatever, but it could be as simple as somebody being a newcomer to the community and not familiar with the situation and the workings. I mean, that can be a challenging situation as well. So
we
I
bring
thought
this up a lot in what we do because, it's a colleague of ours calls it the STP, the same 10 people.
Yes.
Come to those. And there's that part of it. And your whole piece in the Anarchy post about the radical inclusion that gets at this topic,
right?
People's lives don't center around a 5:30 to 7 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night.
Exactly.
Meeting. They have other things pulling at their life that if that's all we do is post the same meeting and do the same things. Here you're an example. You had the time to do that during the traditional public meeting time and really found yourself as very much an outsider, but a different outsider than what we might normally think. So we definitely relate to that and try to develop methods and things to get at that. But I would say, I think the profession today is a little more accepting and recognizing of that, even if we, and I will admit, don't always have the methods down than maybe we probably were when any of us started our career.
Well, I agree. I think planners do try to make an effort. There's sometimes roadblocks that get in the way. It could be budget, it could be time. It could be not just time for that project, but time you have with every other project you're dealing with, trying to juggle them all. It could be even as something, it could be regulatory, state law says you have to, have this many hearings, this many times, has to be published in a paper of general circulation, which a lot of communities don't even have papers of general circulation anymore. So I just think it's something where we need to think about, the people that don't work 8 to 5, the people that don't have a car, the people that might not even have a home, and how do we go to them to get their input versus expecting them to come to us.
Yeah.
Um,
So, all right. So left with that, I think we're already kind of leading into your top 5, at least on one subject, but I want to make sure in terms of order of magnitude and importance, I want to give you the opportunity to give it your swipe. So Rick
Okay.
Brown, you wrote the article, top 5 things that need to happen in the world of planning that bring a little anarchy into our profession. So your number 5 answer would be
Gifting. And
gifting.
yes, I think gifting comes as a result of the other ones. And I'll explain gifting for a second. In putting this together, I looked at the principles that were developed for Burning Man. And then I had come across those as I have a relative who attends that and also has become involved in it more than just attending, and started reading more about them and read the 10 principles. And I go, a lot of this stuff is planning related. I mean, 3 of the main ones: communal effort, civic responsibility, and participation. Right there, you got 3 planning related ones right there. The term of gifting, though, when they're talking about that, they talk about, giving somebody something else. Well, I think if we follow these other radical ideas or anarchy ideas of getting people involved, we are giving them a gift. We are giving them the voice to speak up in the community, the voice to be heard. So that's why I listed that, because it kind of depends on the others. So that would be the one that I would probably rate the lowest, not because it's not important, but just because it kind of depends on the others.
Yeah.
What would
you
be an
raise a
example
good
of
point.
that gift at the end of a process or through a process? What would be something tangible that those in our profession could relate to?
Well, I'm not thinking of something, physical. I'm thinking more comfort level. If somebody has never attended a public hearing before, and you give them the opportunity to speak without feeling intimidated, maybe on their turf instead of our turf, you have just given them something they've never possibly ever had a chance to do before. And so that is a gift of inclusion, a gift of participation. It's not something monetary, it's not something physical, it's something more pride or self-assurance, I think, more than anything.
That's a good point. And I know, just leaning, and you know this, having been a P&Z commissioner, there's times when people come up to that podium and they're just trembling.
Oh, no kidding.
And they're so afraid and nervous to speak in the public. And I've seen it both ways. I've seen where you might have a chairperson who is comforting and reassuring, and hey, take a deep breath, everything's fine, we're all here to listen, everything's going to be great. And then I've heard others where maybe it doesn't go that way, and you're just going, geez, man, this person made an effort to get here, right? They obviously have a reason, and we need to figure out how to I'm with you in the sense that we got to figure out how to make them feel invited, and that their opinion matters.
I agree. If there's been a positive of COVID, it's been that there were options given to people that weren't there before. You could have Zoom public meetings, you could have over the phone public meetings and stuff like that. Personally, I think we should keep those, because I think those are more inclusive than just forcing people to come at 8 o'clock in the evening to a public hearing 10 miles from home, or whatever.
Yeah, I've had plenty where I'm just kind of sitting here sipping my whiskey to the side, waiting for that chance, but I don't have to be in some stuffy room with 200 other people and not knowing what's going to happen. So yeah, I can agree with that. All right. So we've got gifting. Let's go, as Richard Dawson would say, survey says, number 4.
Radical self-reliance. And that's basically, that also grows with participation. It's pretty much part and parcel with the gifting. If somebody feels self-reliant and self-confident, then they will be able to participate further in the process. So it's pretty much just building somebody's comfort level. And that way you not only built their self-reliance to where they could come and talk at public hearings and not feel totally nervous, and then you've also gifted that confidence to them, which was the one just prior to it.
How can we
So-
do that? What are some ways as a planning profession we can?
Well, I
Bring
think
that
Chris
about.
mentioned a good one about the planning commission chair being kind, for lack of a better word, versus grumpy. Yeah, not
Don't
to say
worry,
I've
the
seen
hook's
that.
not going to come out when that 3-minute buzzer goes off because you
Right.
stumbled
Well-
around the first 30 seconds because you're nervous.
Well, you just mentioned the 3-minute buzzer. That does throw people in the middle of their presentation. And I'm not saying it's always wrong to have that, because there are times when you've got 300 or 400 people for something that nobody wants to be there till dawn 3 days from now, but at the same time, putting a time limit on people does cause some issues in terms of nervousness, and then trying to go over their notes and things like that. I also think going to where they are, maybe going to the community room of an apartment complex, going to a union hall, going to a homeless shelter, you name it, they're on their turf then. And I think they would feel more comfortable speaking perhaps in those situations.
Well, let me get your reaction to this, because I'm going to give you the exact opposite.
Okay.
I was in a city and I just moved there, and they were doing a transit master plan. And I see the publication for the transit master plan public meeting at the training room of the police station.
Okay. That's where the meeting was being held.
That's where the meeting was being held.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
And then even better, why is it being held at the police station? Oh, well, that's the only thing that was open that night that we could have that. And I'm just like,
We'll
how
find
about we
another
just do it the next week, postpone?
Yeah.
I can't understand that a transit master plan is so time critical that if the police station's the only place we can meet, I think we might be having the opposite effect of what we want to have there.
Yeah. Yeah. That would probably keep a few people away. I have no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you get the other way too, is everybody, and if you're a planner listening to this and you've not dealt with the public very much, prepare yourself for something. And that something is, and I think all of us here have experienced that, the person who is the opposite of what you described, right? So instead of somebody coming in and shy and kind of meek and intimidated, it's the person that is going to let you have it, and they're going to suck up all the oxygen in the room and take over, and they don't want to hear anybody else's opinion. And we've all dealt with that, right? So to your point, how do you get to that point where the other people can be heard? And that's an art. That's not easy to do.
Well, I agree with you. I think, and I've seen planning commission chairs do a very good job of being inclusive and trying to give people their opportunity. I don't know if I've seen a really bad situation, thankfully. I do agree with you also, though. There's people that come and they kind of take over the room, and for some reason they're always 6'5" and look like a professional football player. So at 5'8", I'm already intimidated. So,
well, I bring this as a question for the two of you, and maybe Chris, this is something in your current role to ask. I mean, going back and putting things on somebody's turf, are we required to make that decision at P&Z at the 5:30 meeting on a Tuesday night at City Hall, or are we allowed to for certain circumstances? And I can get there's a fairness side of it and how to get there, but yeah, what mandates us to have that hearing and make that decision at this particular place versus what you're saying, Rick? I'd love to know what the legalities were around.
Well, yes, and I don't know if you could necessarily do
like
specific public decision or a specific public hearing then, but you could certainly get input throughout the process at other locations, especially something like if you're working on a master plan. You're going to be getting input for weeks, if not months, on that. if not even longer in some cases, I suppose. But you're correct. If you're doing a specific public hearing on a specific project, usually you want to try to have it at a given location. Now you can go to a larger location. Doesn't necessarily, I've seen it done at schools because they expected a large crowd. And I've seen it done at other similar type places. But in terms of the formal decision and formal public hearing, you're right, it probably would have to remain under the auspices of a community site of some
Yeah.
type.
At least when we do it at elementary schools, we get those 6'5" people that were football players having to sit at elementary school cafeteria tables and debate. So, you know,
Great
there's one side of
equalizer.
that.
Great
Yeah,
equalizer.
it's amazing how
So-
small those desks seem.
Yeah. All right, Rick. So we've hit number 5 and number 4. What's number 3 on your list?
Immediacy. I think this is
Mhm.
something that we need to think about right now in planning. You guys were talking about it earlier about some of things and some of the processes and things in planning are 100 years old and have rarely changed in how they've been handled. I think we need to take a hard look at what we're doing right now, and if we can make some quick, low-hanging fruit. There's a planning term if you want to gong me. Changes immediately, and then also work to making other changes on a near-term basis. I think
Yeah.
that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something that we can drag our feet on for too long.
I think it gets at the whole thing that you've touched on in the rest of that thread is people aren't going to feel empowered if they've put their time and effort into this process, or even if you've done all the right things to come to them. And, the primary recommendation is something that's just because of what it is, a 2-year process to change policy. That's while that's needed and necessary, if we don't also give the 2-month victory, the 4-month victory, that to then send to the people that were involved, hey, your input mattered, look what we're already doing. And we realize a code change might take 2 years. It's such a, to me, such a simple thing. And it's what we try to do when we're working on projects. But I think the number of times that that's not the case is pretty alarming.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a rub, because I think that, to your point, especially given that all of the plans that are generated are implemented by a public agency. They might be written by a private entity on behalf of the public agency, but it's the public agency that is doing the implementing. And that in immediacy and public, sector, it ain't always aligned, right? There's a process that has to be had, and there's decisions, and there's, back channels and budget. We got to wait for next year's fiscal budget. I mean, people don't always understand that. And that's why, going back to my immediate point, initial point, especially from a planner, like you gotta be able to know, I think, again, how do we get something done in a few weeks from now, to your point? And I think that's, everybody we keep talking to, that's definitely a central theme. And I come back to, whenever you have a conversation with anybody, it doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter if they're a planner or not, you almost to a T, somehow, some way in that conversation, there's going to be something that comes back and says, well, I don't have time. What, can you meet? Can you go call? Oh, I don't have enough time. Can you get together for it? I don't have time. Time. Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
It's like, it's such a commodity in our lives, right? And yet everything that we have has fast forwarded the pace at which we achieve and accumulate information, or the pace of our lives with technology. But yet, gosh, man, when it comes to planning, sometimes we're just still stuck in a very slow process.
Gosh, you brought up, I mean, this is bringing back something in the recesses of my mind of back in our public sector days, Chris. I remember we were going to do, say, like some $200,000 sub area plan. And I remember proposing, can we get another 50,000 and set that 50,000 aside for implementing a recommendation of it? And you can imagine the looks on people's face. Wait a minute.
No.
What? You get the confused puppy dog head tilt. Why would we do something like that? And I think it's funny. I've never made that connection before. I think that's what you're hitting on. What if we did that?
Yeah.
What if in an overall master planning that's certainly different than like a development approval or a policy change? But yeah, we're going out to do a sub area plan, and guess what? The neighborhood, you're going to be rewarded with a $50,000 implementation measure on the heels of this. How would that change the dynamic and value of what we do?
Well, I mean, imagine taking lessons on how to golf or something, right? You take golf lessons 3 times a week, every day, every week for 6 weeks. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, they say, well, now you're going to have to wait 2 years before you can actually go out and swing a club again.
Yeah.
Because like, wait, what? I mean, maybe a poor analogy there, but has some, I think some.
I would say there's the 3 middle-aged white guys talking about anarchy and planning using a golf analogy. So anybody in the social media realm can bang us over the head for that.
I was gonna go cooking because I like to cook, but anyway. All right, Rick, what's number 2 on your list?
On my list, it would be radical self-expression. And this may be somewhat related to the first 2 we mentioned, but personally, I think the charrette and the SWOT analysis are getting old. And I know not everybody knows what SWOT analysis is, but strengths, weaknesses, strengths and weaknesses, you're going over that, and then opportunities and threats. And time, structure, all those things kind of point in a certain direction. And I know we don't want it to be a no holds barred free fall type meeting or whatever, but at the same time, if you're limiting time, if you're limiting topics to and you're trying to channel the discussion a certain way, then you risk missing important things. I just think if we can expand the process a little bit to where it's not just talking those 4 areas of strengths and weaknesses, et cetera, or the charrette, those tend to be rather structured. And sometimes, I understand that because of the number of people there, but to expand the discussion beyond that, try to get people that aren't necessarily available 3 nights in a week for a charrette, try to go to the people and get their input. A charrette or a SWOT analysis most often could be done with a little bit larger plan. It's not going to be done with a site plan or a rezoning or something like that. It's going to be done with a little larger plan where you have more time and more opportunity to meet with people that don't necessarily get a chance to participate. So I think if you can go outside those boxes, and in planning, they always talks about going outside the silos. If we can go outside those normal silos that we think about and reach out to people who are not necessarily always included, then I think we will have a better product in the end, and a more inclusive product for sure. When I see an online survey done for a plan or something like that, and it might say, well, we got 400 responses, which is statistically successful. Okay, but that's just statistically, if I can say the word, statistically successful for those who have computers. Not everybody.
Successful for the involved group with a large mailing list that happened to put the link in their newsletter and generated 200. It's not that it's not a valid part of the process and necessary, but it shouldn't be the determining factor. And I look, we've always done it, and I've used the term authentic participation, and really saying I could care less how many people show up at a public meeting or fill out the online survey. Is it at the end, can we say everybody who needed a voice in this
Right.
was given that chance, and that might mean going to have a meeting on their turf or with organizations that might represent a certain population group, that might only be a 1-hour interview, but it can provide a lot more valuable than 400 completed surveys.
Exactly. I agree. And I too often I've seen plans base a lot of their goals and objectives on, or they'll use the results of those surveys, the online ones, and sometimes there've been mail-in ones too, but as for a lot of the structure of their goals and objectives, and that's great if you got input elsewhere, but if it's just from that, I think it might be missing some important input from throughout the community, particularly those that are not necessarily as in, digitally capable or available at the given moment, or they're out of town when the surveys are sent, or whatever it might be.
So on your charrette one, the reason my screen went blank, I was scrambling around my office to find this. It's a plastic frame, because this was the type in a public agency that we would give out certificates. So this was framed in my office more than 15 years ago. And it's a definition of charrette: a collaborative process in which people with no authority gather to propose outrageous ideas to spend other people's money in reshaping the world so that it feels good to them. Functionality, cost effectiveness, and maintainability are not allowed to be part of the discussion. A large report is produced over which much fuss is made at high levels, after which the report is shelved and collects industrial levels of dust. Now, that's definitely the height of cynicism, and I don't mean to, the value of something like a charrette is being able to accomplish something in a very short period of time. But I think the group think and the energy of that can overlook the right participants, the right themes, or even just not give us the right amount of room to breathe around an idea and understand maybe its unintended consequences, especially on people or populations that weren't part of that.
Well, and going back to, I think just at the beginning, like, so you're a public agency and you're saying we need to have vast amounts of, public outreach. Okay, well, how are we going to do that? We don't have the staff, so we're going to hire somebody. Okay, how much budget do we have for public involvement, right? And then you go, okay, what's your process? And it's like, it can get tough. It can get real tough, because every hour of someone's time has a monetary value, and what's the return on investment that you're making with a taxpayer dollar to try to get that sort of feedback. And man, I think public involvement in the planning realm is probably one of the, if not the hardest thing that we are constantly talking about and trying hard to do a better job at, right? I mean, we've been talking about social equity now for quite a bit the last several years. And I think, Rick, you're pointing out many of those types of things. And how do we get into every neighborhood and include the people who work different shifts? And man, it's hard. It is really difficult.
We fought this battle on a couple of projects, Chris, that we've pursued, and have been criticized that too high of a percentage of our project, if you just look at the tasks, is public involvement. And my response to that is always, that's who should be building this plan. And we should only be serving as interpreters of those ideas to make them technically or functionally correct or turn them into action items. And so when 30% of a budget is driven toward that, there's to me, there's more authenticity in that than us just kind of treating public involvement as this have to do checklist thing. We'll ask the normal questions, do that, and loosely apply it. And not everything can be that idealistic in that, but I would much rather have a plan built via public input to then turn that into technical and necessary outcomes than just public input to vet ideas that the technical people came up with.
Yeah. All right, Rick, drum roll. Your number one answer. How can planning get a little anarchy into it? What's your top answer for us?
Well, my top answer, and I'm going to put an asterisk with this as well, if I can, because I actually, when I typed it up, I threw immediacy in as a sixth one, but I put it in third place. But radical inclusion, I think, is the most important thing, to think of every way that you can get people people involved. But there was another one that was mentioned in my article that I want to mention here also, and that's decommodification. That's kind of already thought of in the planning area in terms of, monetary reasons can't be included in a decision and things like that when you're considering zoning and land use issues and whatnot. But in terms of this situation, I'm thinking it's related to the haves and the have-nots. Those that have more wealth in terms of knowledge and or income, what have you, have often a better chance to participate. And that can be from a variety of reasons. It could be knowledge of the system, it could be access, it can be knowledge of technical advances to use to access. Whereas those that don't have as much may not be able to participate. They may not have a car to get there. They may not have money for a bus fare. They might even be homeless. They might even be homeless, or they might not have the technical skills. So I think decommodification is an important factor also. And I just wanted to throw that in there to make sure it got included. But going back to radical inclusion, I think that's the be all end all here. If we can think of any way, shape, or possibility of bringing somebody into the discussion who wouldn't otherwise be there, I think we've been successful. And
Yeah.
it can be an incremental thing, gradually getting more people involved through various baby steps. But I think that's the most important aspect of all of this, is trying to be as inclusive as possible across the gamut, whether they're from the wealthy neighborhoods, whether they're from the poor neighborhoods, whether they're from the north side of town, the south side of town, or whatever it may be in terms of the geographic or demographic factors, but to try to get, and like I said, thinking outside the silo, so to speak, and what have we not gotten? Who have we not heard of from here? Have we heard from seniors living in assisted living facilities? Have we heard from students? It's amazing sometimes what students can bring to the equation, whether it be college students or even kids in elementary and middle school. I'll give a perfect example. Back in the day when I lived in mid-Michigan, there was some talk about removing a position from the parks department. And it was a person that worked a lot with kids. They were talking in budget cuts and they were thinking about eliminating this position. And my stepdaughter went to the board meeting to discuss this and explain why this is important to keep, and why this role and this person are important to keep.
Well, I think both of those tying together, we had something I was tangentially involved with, but I think it's an example of this. I've seen many meetings where if, say, a development application, you realize in the discussion, the public input, something's kind of going awry and it's probably not going to get passed tonight. Literally seeing the staff, the moment that's done, they're in the hallway immediately with the developer talking about it, scheduling the meeting the next morning to get it through. Contrast that with, here was an application for a nonprofit that provides a very necessary public good and trying to build a new facility. And the same thing went south. And you know what didn't happen? The staff wasn't convening with that applicant in the hallway right afterward and the meeting the next day. And that to me was just one of these other moments of like, wait a minute, we give this attention to developers and things on the private side because time and money, and totally understand it. That's fine. That's going to happen. But if we can't give the same to an applicant providing a public service and a public function, that to me is the heart of those two particular issues.
That's a great point. And I've seen that situation happen too during my 30 years. So,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, getting to your point, I don't just pointing something out that I've seen in my career in terms of public involvement is you're right. And it's evolved so much because my first assignment as a public sector employee was a 5-day charrette, 5 days in a geographically kind of isolated, big old building in a part of town that was 4 miles removed from where this plan was actually talking about. And the whole thing, well, what I've seen in terms of the opposite, what we've tried to do in some of our projects, for example, is sometimes it's about making up a map and going to a community festival and just parking yourself there
Yes.
and throwing the map on the ground and people walking up going, what's this about? And you just having a conversation. And there's you have $100 map that you had printed off that's a little durable, and a couple stickers or whatever document. And it's like, sometimes that actually can be incredibly effective, and you are capturing a pretty diverse crowd, right? I mean,
I agree.
So like, yeah, sometimes we outthink ourselves, really. So,
well, well, I probably got more comments on planning and zoning proposals on the sideline of soccer games, because people knew I was, a planner, and invariably, what's going on with this, or something like that, or I can't believe the township or the city actually did this or whatever, and so it's just, it's interesting where people will find to bring up the topic. And I think, something like a community festival would be a great idea, or a farmer's market would be a great idea, something like that as well.
So Rick, we're going to turn the page now. We appreciate you revealing your list, and curious how our listeners might respond to some of the things that you've had to say about what sort of anarchy needs to be brought into our profession. But we want to take a couple minutes and get to know you a little bit and hit our lightning round before we wrap up. So I'm going to hit you off first with a question. I'm curious, you've mentioned your background in sales before you got into planning. What did you sell?
Oh, well, I was in retail for a while, and then I was selling industrial maintenance products, shop towels and all that type stuff, and hand cleaner towels, all. It was a company that made disposable products, so we would compete with the trucks that would show up for the rental towels and stuff like that by selling disposable. So that was kind of interesting. I do have a funny story if you want to hear a funny story. I was in sales in the central part of Ohio near Columbus, and I went into a automobile body shop near Groveport, Ohio, and opened the door and went in there and was getting ready to meet the owner and discuss various products he could possibly use. And all of a sudden I see this large object coming in my direction, and it wasn't a dog, and it was coming quite fast. And it turned out this gentleman had a guard pig in his business. And I just froze, not quite knowing what to do, until he came, oh, so-and-so won't hurt you, don't worry about it. Yeah. But this, I don't know, 200 or 300 pound pig just came flying at me. And that was probably the strangest cold call sale I ever had.
Did you get the sale?
Actually, it's been too many years and I don't remember, but yeah, it's probably been 30 years now.
So you moved from Michigan to New Mexico. Food question: green chili stew or pasties?
Oh, green chili. I thought you were going to ask green or red, because you get the question in New Mexico of green or red. Christmas.
Yeah, you got to go the Christmas style for that.
Yeah.
I guess you can get your pasties shipped frozen from Michigan if you get.
That's true, and they are good, and I do like them, but I think I prefer the green chili, as long as it's not too spicy. I don't have to be breathing flames or anything like that after
I always said if I lived in New Mexico, I would be so fat from eating that New Mexican food, and I just can't get enough.
No, I love it. Yeah, the one I've discovered that I didn't know about before is sopapillas, and to put honey on that and eat that, those are just delicious.
Not something you saw much of in Michigan, huh?
No.
So on that note, your trek from Michigan down to New Mexico, were there any Michigan musicians blasting through your stereo system that were some of your favorites?
Ooh, Michigan musicians. Okay, now you're making it hard. I thought you would just ask musicians in general or something. Well, I've seen Bob Seger in concert back in the day. He was opening for Kiss back in the 1970s. It was kind of an interesting concert. Let me see here. I would have loved to have seen Alice Cooper, never saw him. There's a bunch of bands I wish I had seen over time. Eminem, I probably would have liked to have seen too, as well as some of the Motown performers. Because I think the Motown music from Michigan is my favorite genre of music from Michigan. Anything from the Temptations on down, you name it. That's my favorite genre. So
I
I
always
was putting
think
a
of
plug
Bob's
for a new one. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I always think of Bob Seger as a de facto planner because every other song he's looking for shelter, and so I kind of feel like he's probably part of us.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say a new band on the indie scene that has Michigan roots, if you want to check them out, is Michigander.
Okay.
Out there. So Michigan based, seen them open a couple times and really good. So if you're looking for that new generation outside of the Ted Nugents and Bob Segers and all of those, that's one to check out.
Okay. I that's one of the ongoing questions is in Michigan. It's Michigander or Michiganian, and there's differences of opinion. I prefer Michigander personally, but you have different opinions among different people on which is the more appropriate.
How many times have you had to use the mitt since you moved to New Mexico to
describe
where you live?
Yeah. When I say where we moved, it's invariably, we used to live up here. Yeah. And we were trolls because we lived below the bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Anybody that lives below the bridge is a troll in Michigan.
Have you had any Walter White sightings since moving to New Mexico?
No, but we've done the going around to the various sites. Better Call Saul is actually my favorite. I love Better Call Saul, but we've gone to a number of the locations around town and seen them, and two of my sons who were visiting, we took them around to see them as well. And right off of Old Town Plaza, there is now a gift shop and museum there.
Okay.
Where you can you can sit at Saul's desk. You can stand at the counter where Dos Pollos Hermanos counter.
Oh, yes.
And you can also sit in Uncle Tio's wheelchair and push ding the little bell.
Wow.
See,
well,
I used to give a Blues Brothers tour of Chicago when people come. So I think when I come down to the Albuquerque area, I have to get the Better Call Saul Breaking Bad tour from you. There's tours there's these guys or gals, I don't know who all's involved, but you can go around in a tour in a Winnebago. And just like it beat up old Winnebago, like they were doing their business.
But say no to the party favors with the blue ice.
Well, I say you get blue hard candy to chew on.
Yeah, I would say I'll have you know that in Idaho we have the Napoleon Dynamite Memorial Tetherball Court.
Oh,
in
really?
Preston, Idaho. Yes. So we're on the map, I guess. But
well, they just had an unveiling of a statue of Walter White and Jesse Pinkman at the convention center, and there was some debate among politicians down in New Mexico. Should we really be celebrating it this much?
Well, Aaron Paul is a local boy from where we are here.
Oh, really?
Boise. Yeah. He comes around all the time, and kind of there's Aaron Paul sightings, and every year or something, and so he loves it here.
He was supposed to be, from what I understand, he was supposed to be written out of the show the first year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But the relationship between he and Walter White got so good that they couldn't do it, and they had.
Why are you writing me out, yo? All right. Well, Mr. Rick Brown, we appreciate your time. It is time for us to adjourn and call an episode complete. We thank you very much. For all of you listening, check out his blog, Pan Ethos. It's pretty awesome. He puts a lot of hard work and a lot of good thought into it. And Rick, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on the Planning Commission podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it greatly.
Good. All right. I need a motion to adjourn. There's only one person to do it.
No, given it's anarchy, I'm gonna say screw that. Let's just go.
Get out of here. All right. Well, close enough. So thank you everybody for listening. Keep tuning in. Look out for us on YouTube and all the other ways you can find your podcasts. Appreciate it. And we'll keep on keeping on. Have a good one. Bye.